Thalia Goethe, the second princess of the Rome Empire, stood perfectly still, her expression empty, and her eyes void of any light. Her attendant had once remarked that she carried herself like a warrior, sharp and unyielding, yet in that moment, surrounded by the splendor of her chambers, there was no strength visible, only stillness. Sunlight flooded the room, gilding every rich fabric, every carved detail, every precious ornament that filled the space. But all that opulence, all the grandeur of the imperial palace, only served to cast her inner emptiness into sharper relief. She was wrapped in luxury, yet her heart felt as barren as a wasteland. Arranged neatly upon the vanity were countless bottles of rare perfume, jars of costly powders, and sets of exquisite cosmetics, everything needed to craft a flawless appearance. The attendant moved about with diligent care, preparing Thalia for the evening ahead, smoothing, dusting, and arranging. Yet when Thalia glanced into the great mirror before her, her reflection seemed strangely blurred, as if even the glass could not quite grasp who she truly was. Then the attendant paused, a soft, fond smile spreading across her face as she leaned closer, studying the princess's features. She praised Thalia, saying how strikingly she resembled Empress Cenevia, her mother, and went on, reminiscing with bright eyes that when fully dressed and made up, Thalia looked exactly as Empress Cenevia had at 18 years old, radiant and unforgettable. Before the woman could say more, a hand with nails painted deep red shot out and halted her movements abruptly. The attendant froze, shocked and bewildered. Never before had the princess acted with such sudden, decisive force. Until now, Thalia had always appeared passive, resigned to whatever was done or said around her. Slowly, Thalia turned her head, her gaze hard and cold as ice, stripping away the mask of indifference she had worn for so long. There was no softness left in her expression, no trace of the compliant girl everyone expected. "Enough," she said, her tone icy and flat. "Bring the gown." Silence fell heavily over the room, thick and tense. The attendant, trembling slightly, quickly fetched the garment, speaking again with a touch of pride as she held it up. It was the very dress Empress Cenevia had worn the first time she arrived at the Asperg Palace, a piece of history preserved with reverence. At the sight of the vivid, brilliant red fabric, Thalia's attention fixed upon it. The attendant added that Empress Cenevia herself had seemed to have prepared it just for her daughter, as if waiting for this day. Thalia remained quiet, but beneath her cold exterior lay deep suspicion. She asked, her voice even, whether the attendant truly remembered the gown her mother had worn so many years ago, in a time long past. The woman nodded eagerly, confirming she remembered every detail perfectly. Lost in memory now, the attendant spoke on, saying she could never forget that glorious day. In her mind the memory shone like a blinding light, Empress Cenevia, beautiful beyond description, appearing more splendid than any portrait or painting could ever capture. That year, her beauty had been so profound it could bring people to tears, simply because they realized such perfection could exist in the world. Vague images drifted through the attendant's mind, of Empress Cenevia and the Emperor from years ago, and she recounted, almost intoxicated by nostalgia, how His Majesty had been utterly captivated, unable to tear his eyes away from her. She did not notice the frost creeping over Thalia's features, or the sharpness growing in her blue eyes. "If you have time to chatter, finish your work," Thalia cut in sharply, her tone commanding. The attendant fell silent immediately and hurried to obey. Once dressed in that magnificent red gown and wearing the delicate, sparkling crown, Thalia was transformed completely. She radiated a beauty that was both haunting and noble, sharp and regal all at once. The attendant could not help but gasp in awe, exclaiming how breathtaking the princess looked. But behind Thalia's blue eyes burned a fierce, determined spark. Standing before the mirror, she made a quiet, secret vow. Just for tonight, she would be the most beautiful person in that entire place. More than that, she would surpass her own mother. Every bit of effort, every detail was driven by one burning desire to be seen, to be admired, to make him look at her even just once. That longing shone clearly in her gaze, a desperate kind of hope tangled with despair. If she succeeded, she believed, no one would ever glance at Isla again. No one would ever compare her to anyone else, or dismiss her as second best. It was a hungry, aching need that consumed the forgotten princess, burning through her chest. She wondered bitterly if this was truly what it meant to be a princess of the empire, trapped beneath invisible pressure, her fate bound and controlled by others. And beneath that thought, anger began to rise, hot and explosive. Suddenly, Thalia snatched up a golden hairpin from the table and struck it hard against the wooden surface. The attendant cried out in fright, unable to believe the princess would do something so reckless. She stumbled backward and sank to the floor, shaking with fear, looking up at Thalia, who stood tall, cold, and imperious before the glass. In her hand now she held not a comb or a powder jar, but a sharp-pointed object, a symbol of the dangerous change taking hold within her. Her mind filled with bitter memories of her sister Isla. Everything always seemed to go right for Isla. She was the bright, shining flame before His Majesty, the one who held their father's affection and earned the admiration of everyone around her. She was loved, cherished, and placed at the center of everything. Thalia looked at her own reflection again, her expression twisting with deep disgust. She whispered that she hated that mirror, hated seeing herself, hated everything it showed her. With one sharp movement, she smashed the glass into 1,000 jagged pieces. "Bring me another," she ordered, her voice devoid of emotion. Old memories surged up unbidden even after Queen Bernadette had died, and Ayla had become nothing more than a concubine. That shameful stain upon their family had never faded. It lingered, unspoken but ever present. Now Thalia's image was shattered across the floor, split into countless fragments, a living proof of that lingering sin. Every shard reflected only a part of her, a broken, incomplete existence. And it was not just her face, the entire luxurious world around her looked distorted and wrong when seen through those cracks. A terrible truth settled over her. As long as she lived, as long as she existed, that sin would never end, never fade, never be erased. When she stepped out of her chambers, a knight-standing guard stared at her, stunned into silence. He stammered that the princess looked radiant tonight, unlike ever before. But Thalia's coldness returned instantly. She snapped at him to stop speaking nonsense and go about his duties. The young man retreated unsteadily, overwhelmed and crushed by her sharp, commanding tone. Twilight painted the windows deep red, a warning that a long, fateful night was about to begin. Seated inside her moving carriage, Thalia looked out in silence. Her expression was calm, unreadable, yet her mind was already working through every step of a plan she had long ago laid out. As the carriage swayed gently along the road, her blue eyes never wavered. Her will was unshakable, her resolve absolute. Inside the grand royal banquet hall, the event was already underway. Melodious music filled the air, and nobles chatted happily among themselves, secretly hoping the evening would pass smoothly without incident or scandal. But suddenly, the sound of carriage wheels rolling to a halt echoed outside the doors, announcing the arrival of an unexpected guest. The luxurious carriage stopped right before the palace steps, carrying a figure about to turn the entire night upside down. Inside, Thalia bit her lip slowly, her eyes gleaming with dangerous calculation. While everyone hoped for peace and order, she secretly thought it would be far more interesting to let everything fall apart, to let chaos reign completely. Moments later, the herald's voice rang out, announcing the arrival of the second princess. Immediately, murmurs and whispers rippled through the crowd. One delicate, embroidered shoe stepped gracefully onto the stone floor, every movement flowing with natural nobility. Thalia emerged and stood tall at the entrance, facing a sea of astonished, curious, and wide-eyed gazes. Possessing a striking beauty and carrying herself with icy grace, she walked forward with her head held high, turning the banquet hall into her own personal stage. Though a dark premonition lingered in her mind, her lips curved into a smile full of hidden meaning. She advanced steadily toward the man standing at the center of the room, ignoring the shock written across every noble face around her. When one lord stepped forward and demanded sharply why she had come unannounced, Thalia remained frighteningly calm. Her blue eyes locked onto his, piercing deep into his mind, casting an invisible pressure that made him step back instinctively. The man began to stammer, sweat breaking out on his forehead as he sensed the danger radiating from her. Memories of a younger, innocent Isla and those who had followed her came back to Thalia, sharp and painful, a ridiculous contrast to the bitter reality of now. Suddenly her smile sharper than a blade, signaling that a cruel performance was reaching its end. The man before her trembled, terrified as he realized the terrible truth hidden beneath her stunning appearance. In the next instant, Thalia's expression shifted completely. She beamed, bright and radiant, wiping away every trace of threat as if it had never existed. She stepped closer to him, and he flushed red right to the tips of his ears. When he stammered, asking if she had come only to humiliate him publicly, Thalia leaned in and whispered provocatively that this was her father's palace, and tonight's celebration was held in honor of her brother. Her overwhelming allure left the man confused and flustered, completely losing his composure amid the heavy scent of roses that filled the hall. She lifted her chin arrogantly and asked in return what right he had to question a princess's presence here. Her absolute authority left him confused and trembling, as if he stood before a magnificent but deadly monster. She turned her face slightly away, and in her cold blue eyes a plan for cruel revenge began to take shape. Standing splendidly in the center of the great hall, shining like a flame yet dangerous as a storm, she forced everyone around her to watch carefully, to tread lightly, to fear what she might do. High above, the honored balcony remained empty, the place meant for the victor of this night of destiny. She moved calmly through the crowd, every gesture radiating power and control, turning all those around her into puppets dancing to her tune. Somewhere in her mind, she thought of the one she had come here to face, wondering why her main target had not yet appeared, so that she could finally act. But reality was already leaving a trail of blood in its wake, proof that a bloody tragedy had truly begun. Isla lay on the ground, twisting in agony, blood pouring from her mouth like a cruel curse. She collapsed in the middle of the crowd, who looked on with indifference, her breath fading slowly into utter despair. To Thalia, however, this was nothing more than the end Isla deserved, punishment for the shame she had brought to the lands of Gutoa. The princess smiled arrogantly, certain that from this day forward, Isla would never again have the chance to cause trouble or stir up chaos. In her mind, Isla's image, drowned in thousands of flowers and bathed in red blood, looked as though she begged for forgiveness too late. Thalia raised her glass of wine, silently wishing she could turn that horrific vision into reality right then and there. Her gaze burned with cold, murderous intent. She wanted to see her enemy choking, suffering, dying in pain. A venomous curse echoed deep inside her heart. She hoped death would come quickly and put an end to her rival's existence forever. Her fingers tightened around the stem of the glass, pouring every ounce of her resentment and hatred into that cruel wish. When it was done, she said coldly that Isla had died as she deserved, an end to a life full of mistakes and faults. She cursed her enemy silently, hoping she would never open her eyes again. Just then, a respectful voice spoke from behind her. "Your Highness," an elegant man approached, bowing deeply before the second princess after a long time apart. Amidst all the luxury and noise of the banquet, he spoke flatteringly, saying Thalia had grown even more beautiful and captivating. She narrowed her eyes slightly as she looked at him, instantly recognizing the newcomer as Count Sirient. He lifted her slender hand gently and placed a respectful kiss upon it, full of gallantry and grace. "Did my mother send you to entertain me?" Thalia asked, her tone sharp with irony. The Count replied that the Empress always worried for her well-being. "Even without her command," Thalia said coldly, "you would never have had the courage to approach me of your own will." Her gaze hardened. "Look around you, Count. See clearly where you stand now." Suddenly the entire hall fell silent. Every male eye turned toward the second princess, standing alone and magnificent in the center of the room. Count Sirient looked at her with a mix of desire and disdain, and warned her not to act recklessly or touch what belonged to the crown prince, lest she bring ruin upon herself. Thalia guessed the Count was no longer in favor at court, and he admitted with a smile that he had been out of grace for a long time. That was exactly why he had been given the task of escorting her tonight. A turn of fortune, he considered, with great satisfaction, a wonderful opportunity. "Did the Empress send you to rescue her abandoned daughter, the black sheep of the family?" Thalia asked, lifting an eyebrow. Count Sirient held her hand softly. "My mission is to help your Highness shine brighter than anyone here tonight," he said, his eyes burning with passion. "I will make you the center of attention, above all others in this room." Standing tall in the grand, glowing hall, he bowed and invited Thalia to dance, and with that, the performance of schemes and secrets officially began. Thalia thought to herself that everyone here tonight expected her to apologize, to bow her head, or to admit defeat, but her eyes showed nothing but pure contempt. Some wanted her to fall silent, others wanted her to vanish completely, as if she had never existed, yet she swore silently never to submit or yield. She would let the fire of her hatred burn brighter than even her own beauty. Murmurs of admiration rose as the second princess began her dance, sending a clear declaration of war to all those who had always tried to crush her or keep her down. As Count Sirient guided her across the floor, Thalia studied him carefully, wondering what schemes he truly hid beneath his polished, elegant appearance. She had to admit he was skilled at dancing. Every step was precise, smooth, and graceful under the bright lights. Half her face was hidden behind the sleeve of his coat, but her deep blue eyes never stopped watching him, sharp and cold as a hunter waiting for the right moment to strike. Thalia swayed in time with the music, striking poses so enchanting they left more than one onlooker breathless, captivated by her unreal beauty. Round and round they turned, watched by curious, envious, and admiring nobles all around them. Thalia held her head high, turning the dance floor into a political stage where she alone held true control. Her lips stretched into a smile filled with hidden intent, and a terrifying sense of satisfaction shone upon her beautiful, calculating face. Suddenly a sharp, ringing announcement cut through the hum of conversation, declaring the arrival of Crown Prince Gareth and First Princess Isla. The festive atmosphere fractured instantly, and Thalia's mind turned cold. She would put an end to their joy right here, right now, and let this night turn into a dramatic confrontation neither of them would forget. The golden pair descended the grand staircase, bathed in admiring gazes, completely unaware of the storm, and the trap Thalia had long been preparing just for them. Thalia narrowed her eyes against the bright light surrounding them. Even she could not entirely hide the spark of sharp attention that flared in her gaze at the sight of that royal splendor. Isla and Gareth, twins perfect in appearance, perfect in rank, were they truly the most favored beings in the entire Rome Empire? Cheers echoed through the great hall, and everyone rushed to pay homage, bowing low before the precious siblings who stood like living icons of perfection. The princess, the very image of grace and virtue, smiled softly, speaking with a clear tone of triumph as she thanked everyone for already knowing and celebrating their happy news. Still caught in the swirling rhythm of the dance with Count Syriant, Thalia secretly prepared to turn everything upside down, to reduce all this opulence, all this celebration, into nothing but ash. She turned her head slightly, looking away to avoid the harsh reality before her, while deep contempt rose in her heart for all those who worshipped such hypocrisy. Her steps remained light and graceful even amidst the malicious whispers drifting through the crowd. Every movement radiated noble elegance, yet there was something undeniably lonely and isolated about her. Suddenly a thought struck her, leaving her stunned. Her blue eyes narrowed further, filled with suspicion and sharp calculation as she realized what lay beneath the surface. Behind the twins' angelic faces and flawless manners hid mocking, malicious laughter, carefully tucked away in the shadows. Under that false halo of perfection, venomous serpents lay coiled, and in that truth she saw that they and she were not so very different after all. Amidst the sacred luxury of the banquet, Count Syriant's lips twisted into an ironic smirk. He remarked that Thalia seemed once again determined to ignore everyone around her. Wearing an air of confident triumph, he asked what she intended to do if she planned to take the first step and go greet them herself. Her reply was cold and sharp, turning his own question back upon him. Was that not exactly why he had come here with her in the first place? Her fingers, nails painted vivid red, tightened around the stem of her wine-glass until it seemed she might crush it to dust. She hid the fierce, boiling rage rising inside her, and then turned abruptly. Her sharp gaze shot straight toward the entrance, as if she had just felt a powerful shock-wave ripple through the room. Her pupils contracted sharply at the sight of a familiar figure, and her proud stride came to an abrupt halt. Standing before her was a man of overwhelming presence and charisma, with silver hair and eyes of piercing icy blue that seemed to dominate every corner of the banquet hall. He stood tall at the top of the grand staircase, speaking calmly with the guards, his whole bearing radiating authority and strict discipline. Then he began to descend, step by step, moving with the deliberate, predatory grace of a hunter closing in on its prey. The murmurs of the nobles died away, replaced by a silence as heavy as death. Supreme Commander of the Imperial Guard Varkas had officially made his entrance, marking the beginning of the storm that would define the night. His face was as cold as ice, and he swept his gaze across the hall like a wolf scanning for its target. He moved with imposing authority, making his way straight to the crown prince to offer his respects. As Varkas extended his hand toward Isla in greeting, Thalia's fingers clamped so hard around the glass that her knuckles turned white. Inside her mind, a desperate command repeated itself over and over. Do not touch her. Varkas, do not you dare touch her. Standing near her, Count Syriant felt a sudden terrifying chill run through him. He realized with dread that he had stepped into a game far larger, far deadlier than he could ever hope to control. Anxious and unsettled, he suggested the princess leave the banquet hall immediately to preserve her honor and reputation. Thalia lifted her chin slightly, a faint, proud motion, while silently resolving that she would never retreat or run away in shame, not when her goal of vengeance remained unfulfilled. The crowd around her parted instinctively as she moved. Every eye turned toward her as she walked forward proudly, straight into the very center of power. Commander Varkas, along with Gareth and Isla, turned as one, facing the provocative, unyielding presence of the second princess. A suffocating tension settled over the room as the four key figures of the Rome Empire finally stood face to face. Crown Prince Gareth stared hard at his sister, searching desperately for even a flicker of hesitation beneath her aloof, distant expression. But Thalia suddenly brightened, her face glowing with radiant charm, and offered sweet, gentle greetings to her dear brother and beloved sister. In return, she received only Isla's calculating silence, a clear sign that a ruthless battle of wills between people bound by the same blood was about to erupt. Whispers rippled through the hall, everyone speaking with delight and relief that Isla had recovered safely after her recent accident. Varkas watched Isla thoughtfully, reminding her quietly that not long ago she had appeared to be at death's door, weak and fading. She tilted her head gracefully in response, offering sincere thanks for his concern and the attention of everyone around her. Isla smiled her soft, untroubled smile, acting as if nothing at all was wrong, and said she felt completely recovered and far better now. Watching from the shadows, Thalia burned with rage. She knew perfectly well that Isla knew exactly who had poisoned her, and yet her enemy remained calm, composed, terrifyingly serene. That attitude was the ultimate insult. It made Thalia feel as if she wasn't even worth the effort of making Isla truly angry. She gripped her wineglass so hard her hand shook, cursing inwardly that she hadn't used a far stronger poison to finish the job right then and there. She told herself her family's reputation had already been stained and damaged by her actions, and sooner or later punishment would catch up with her. But she was ready to bear the consequences herself, so long as her family never had to suffer or pay the price for what she had done. Once again, the image of Isla collapsing in a pool of blood, a bitter regret that she hadn't been more thorough, more ruthless, when she had the chance. Gareth ground his teeth in pure contempt. He shouted at Thalia, demanding to know how she dared show her face here after lowering herself so completely. He stepped toward her aggressively, asking mockingly if her mother truly believed that dressing her up and pretending she was the eldest daughter would ever be enough to charm or impress anyone. Thalia looked at her brother with calm, steady eyes, and coldly pointed out that such crude, uncontrolled behavior made him far more human than his mask of a hypocritical noble allowed. She stood tall in her brilliant red gown and declared proudly that it was the ceremonial dress her own mother had worn on the very day she had become crown princess. The revelation struck Gareth like a blow, leaving him stunned and speechless. The space around them seemed to darken and grow suffocating. Thalia pinned him with a sharp, piercing gaze and asked if their own father had not once cherished and adored that very dress above all others. Just then, a hand rested lightly on her shoulder. It was Isla who intervened, her tone soft and unperturbed. "Yes, it truly suits you very well," she said. "And thank you for coming tonight. This day is very meaningful to both of us, but especially to me. I wanted as many people as possible to share in my happiness and offer their congratulations." Then Isla reached out and took Varkas's hand, her face glowing with triumph. She made the official announcement. The date of their marriage had finally been fixed. When the season of winds arrived, she would leave the palace to become a member of the Sharkan household. Before that, however, she would embark on a holy pilgrimage to receive the blessings of the saints, and she would depart before the height of summer heat. This, she declared, would be the last time they would meet. She was glad to see Thalia one final time before leaving the imperial palace, so that she could say her last goodbyes. She invited Thalia to enjoy the banquet prepared in celebration of their union, before she was gone forever. Thalia listened in silence, her mind turning dark. "This is the last time I shall ever see you," she thought. "Then I must certainly bless your future, dear sister." Varkas suddenly felt a cold shiver run down his spine. His warrior's instinct warned him that terrible, explosive anger was about to burst forth from Thalia. In a flash of movement, she threw the full contents of her red wine glass straight at Isla, but the commander stepped in just in time, shielding her with his own body. Isla stood motionless, her face turning deathly pale. The dark stains spreading across her pristine white gown looked horribly like a mark of mortal blood. Thalia stood tall and magnificent in her red gown, and spoke the most venomous curse she could summon. She wished for her enemy to endure slow, agonizing pain every single day of her life. Her smile was diabolical. shining with terrifying brilliance. Her eyes burned with supreme contempt, as if she delighted in the suffering she imagined inflicting. Thalia remained fixed in place, overwhelmed by the cruel confessions and truths laid bare by her sister, the same sister who had spent countless nights praying for her downfall and ruin. Gareth hissed a threat through gritted teeth, consumed by a maddening rage that boiled in his veins and twisted his features beyond recognition. Suddenly a rough, forceful hand clamped tightly around Thalia's slender wrist. Violence erupted, shattering all the rules and protocols of noble hypocrisy. He used crushing strength to break her resistance, creating a scene of suffocating oppression right in the heart of the Palace of Intrigues. Thalia struggled, trying to wrench herself free, her fine gown crumpling and creasing under the cruelty of her own blood and kin. Yet her eyes blazed with magnificent defiance, and she told him coldly that it seemed he had never learned his lesson. At such insolence, Varkas warned her sharply of the sacred boundary she had dared to cross, his eyes revealing clear, murderous intent. His grip tightened even further, as if he intended to grind the bones in her arm to dust. It was a declaration of bloody war between the heirs of the imperial line. Another rough hand seized her other wrist, squeezing so hard the veins stood out menacingly against her skin. She gritted her teeth against the pain, stifling a cry, as his strength threatened to crush her completely. Gareth stood beside Ayla, turned back to Thalia, and looked at her with pure disdain, asking just how far she intended to fall and disgrace herself. Varkas stood directly in front of her and said coldly that lowering herself in such a way still did not seem to be enough for her. Her eyes suddenly blazed with fierce, burning fire, fixing him with a look that seemed ready to consume everyone who judged her in the name of morality. She gave a provocative smile and asked the commander if someone is disgraced and cast out as she was truly so monstrously ruined and fallen. She leaned close to his ear and spoke in a low, heavy voice, ordering him to drop his arrogant attitude of the favored chosen warrior. In the dim, heavy atmosphere, she demanded he wipe that self-satisfied smile from his face, for he knew nothing of the limits reached by someone who had fallen all the way to the bottom of the abyss. Varkas tightened his hold abruptly, an act of absolute intimidation that made her tremble in his inescapable grip. Thalia admitted bitterly that from his high, lofty position she must look utterly miserable and worthy only of pity. But inside she told herself she was still far from being the worst player or actress in this entire stage full of lies and deceit. Behind his unfathomable gaze lay a terrifying secret, one ready to swallow up every last shred of trust or hope she might still hold. She felt with bitter certainty that this man would be the one to push her over the edge and into the dark abyss where hope was nothing but a luxury she could no longer afford. And so, before she fell, Thalia swore she would throw herself in first, for it was the only way she could ever demand justice. Varkas answered her only with a gaze cold as frozen ice, his eyes shining with such a frightening light that the air around them suddenly became impossible to breathe. A hand rested softly upon the commander's arm, and Ayla's voice rose, gentle and sweet, cutting through the deathly silence that had fallen over the room. She looked up at him with eyes filled with sorrow, pleading quietly for him to take her away from this place, to change the gown that had been stained and dishonored. Varkas Rydgosiarkan looked down at the trembling young woman at his side, his attention entirely fixed upon her, completely ignoring the solitary, proud figure of the second princess standing alone amidst the crowd. Under the weight of thousands of curious, searching, and judging gazes, Varkas led Ayla away. In that moment Thalia stood revealed as the great loser of this battle for influence and power. He placed a protective hand upon Ayla's shoulder and spoke coldly, declaring that he would obey her every command without question. It marked the absolute end of whatever fragile truce had ever existed between them. As he walked away with Ayla close against him, Thalia's gaze burned with blood-red hatred, silently swearing that she would make him pay with his life for this betrayal. Count Syriant stood nearby, terrified, watching as Thalia's fingers clenched so tightly around her wine glass that her knuckles turned white and bloodless. Amidst the thick, heavy tension pressing down upon everyone, a quiet suggestion arose. Would it not be wisest to leave the banquet now, before things grew worse? Thalia lifted her chin proudly, her posture defiant, and made it clear she had not come all this way only to turn her back and leave under such contempt and humiliation. The entire hall fell abruptly silent. An invisible, crushing weight settled over the gathering, heavy with the power struggles between the Empire's most powerful figures. The Count leaned close to her ear, whispering anxiously that perhaps it would be better to depart immediately while she still could. Thalia only smiled with sharp irony and asked why she should leave. She had not yet truly enjoyed the feast, nor seen the end of the celebration Isla had promised to finish early. High above, from a place of authority, a monster in the shape of Prince Gareth watched her, his eyes burning with hatred, ready to destroy anyone or anything that stood in his path. Again she asked herself, with bitter amusement, why she would leave now, when she had yet to witness the very end of the joy Ayla had spoken of. Suddenly Thalia realized with startling clarity that the Count standing behind her had never truly been on her side, not in the way she had believed or hoped. Outside, the luxurious carriage waited in darkness, silent and still as a tomb prepared to bury every last one of her remaining hopes. Gareth stood tall and immovable like a monument, using the full weight of his authority and rank to crush the stubborn defiance of the second princess. Her steps faltered, then stopped entirely. It felt as though the ground beneath her feet had shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. Thalia's mind plunged into a living nightmare, where every breath she drew tasted of deep, consuming despair. Her legs gave way, and she collapsed upon the cold stone floor. All the pride and majesty of an imperial princess vanished in an instant, leaving her small and broken. Then came a sudden, sharp reversal. Gareth approached slowly, and declared coldly that from this moment onward she would have no one left to support or defend her. From that moment, his gaze shone with pure malice. He looked down at her and asked if she still possessed the courage to face the punishment that was swiftly approaching. Thalia lifted her head, her whole body trembling, and finally understood the truth. She was nothing more than a pitiful pawn in this ruthless game for power and control. The hand of destiny began to close tightly around her, proving that everything she and her family had built was now nothing more than ash and ruin. Gareth leaned close to her ear, murmuring that he had been forced to endure her presence, her actions, and her existence for far too long. His hand gripped the rich fabric of her gown, crushing it in his grasp as if he wished to crush the very last spark of pride remaining within her shaking body. Inside the confined, narrow space of the carriage, he loomed over her, dominating her completely, and reminded her harshly that the entire family had suffered her presence and her mistakes for years. Their patience had finally run out. Thalia felt herself suffocating under that overwhelming pressure. Her eyes widened in shock and fear as she saw the immense, boundless hatred burning in her brother's gaze. He pressed her further, driving his words deep like knives, emphasizing that his kindness and tolerance had lasted only until his patience broke completely. She groaned in pain as his iron grip refused to loosen or relent, turning what should have been a celebration into a terrible, endless nightmare. Beneath their feet, the stark contrast between his polished imperial boots and her delicate, fine slippers highlighted her fall from grace, from royal princess to disgraced outcast. Raw, bleeding scratches marred her pale skin, silent witnesses to the violence she endured without a word. Gareth's lips twisted into a cruel smirk. He said she would no longer suffer from hunger or want, for his contempt and disdain for her had grown beyond all measure and limit. Their fingers barely brushed in the strange violet-hued light inside the carriage, marking the final end to a brother-sister bond that had long since rotted and decayed. Thalia writhed in pain, racked by dry, bloodied coughs that tore at her chest. Her eyes closed tight under the relentless oppression of Crown Prince Gareth, trapped within the narrow walls of the carriage. From outside, the sound of dry, repeated sobs drifted out, announcing a dark and tragic end for the second princess. Gareth stood silently staring at the bright red drops of blood forming on his own fingers. Beneath his imperious, cold exterior, a terrible truth was slowly revealing itself. Count Siriant and the witnesses standing outside remained frozen in place, their faces pale and terrified. They realized they had just watched a punishment so cruel and severe it defied all understanding. The Crown Prince cornered Thalia in the dim, shadowy space, ordering her coldly to carve this moment of humiliation deep into her memory, to keep it there until her dying day. He mocked the pride and power of the Empress, their mother, using the cruelest words he could find to snuff out the last breath of life and fight left within his own sister. In that darkness, a venomous declaration echoed, a monster as infamous and wicked as she no longer deserved to exist, nor to ever dare mock or challenge him again. A loud, startling thud shook the carriage, making the guards outside jump in alarm. They immediately inquired if His Majesty had been insulted or harmed within. Count Siriant watched the carriage drive away in utter shock, unable to comprehend the unprecedented, terrifying fury Gareth had just displayed. Inside, Thalia reached out weakly with hands stained red with blood, letting out a long sigh of absolute despair as she finally accepted her complete and utter ruin. For a long time, Thalia remained motionless in the dark interior, her gaze empty and fixed upon the ceiling as if she had finally surrendered to this cruel fate. But soon after, a chilling smile spread across her bloodied face. She made a silent vow to herself. She would rebuild everything, nurture it again, and make it stronger than before. The other and Sirian stood stunned when they heard her speak, declaring that she would make things longer, more beautiful and more perfect, only for the pleasure of destroying and cutting them down with her own hands when the time came. She murmured that all this ruin and pain was nothing but a great waste. Her crimson lips stretched into a twisted, mocking expression in the face of the cruelty she had both provoked and suffered. Suddenly her gaze turned icy, looking deep into the darkest corners of her soul where something dangerous in waiting lay hidden. A small, broken bird lay dead upon the cold stone floor outside, a symbol of the death of trust and of an innocence now buried forever. That vision of silent death awakened a terrifying memory inside her, one that had haunted her from the deepest parts of her past. The memory of a rainy day beneath an old gnarled tree came flooding back. For the very first time, she had known abandonment and heart-wrenching loneliness, even surrounded by the splendor of the imperial palace. She wondered if her heart had frozen over completely after so much betrayal, so many lies and so much pain. In that memory, a woman spoke softly to Thalia and entrusted her with a heavy, terrible responsibility. In those memories, her mother wore a gentle yet commanding smile, reminding her child she must always be grateful for what she possessed and for her place in the world. Yet the reality behind those words was nothing but venomous whispers from servants and courtiers, leaving the young girl confused, isolated, and utterly alone. The colossal architecture of the palace, with its towering columns and vast halls, seemed constantly to crush the fragile frame of the forgotten princess. In every shadow, a malicious gaze and blurry face watched and waited, trapping her childhood in a state of constant fear and anxiety. Young Thalia cried in silence, terrified of walking through long, empty corridors or facing the heavy, suffocating loneliness that filled every room. Servants stood motionless as stone statues, deliberately ignoring the desperate calls and cries of her young heart, One small, solitary footstep pressed into the cold floor, the moment she decided to run away from that terrifying reality. The child fled in absolute panic, screaming in fear, yet no hand reached out to save or comfort her. The sky darkened rapidly, and heavy rain began to fall, as if the heavens themselves wept for the fate of this mistreated soul. She saw a tiny bird lying helpless in the mud, soaked through by freezing water, a perfect mirror of her own inner distress and misery. To anyone seeing that lone child standing in the storm, no one would have guessed she was the second princess, despised and rejected by her own family. Every small step she took through the mud felt like the beginning of a path paved with traps, hatred, and pain, a road she was forced to walk for the rest of her life. Poor Thalia had become a target her own mother wished to destroy, driven by an obsession to erase every trace and memory of the previous empress. Innocent and confused, she wondered if the little creature fallen from the tree was also fighting desperately just to stay alive. That heavy, muddy path marked the moment she realized she had been abandoned in a world built entirely on betrayal. She slipped and fell hard into the black, thick mud, leaving her stunned and breathless. It revealed the harsh truth that she truly had no support, no allies, and no safety in this world. She stared in horror at her reflection, stained and dirty, feeling the shame and disgrace seeping deep into her bones. A princess rejected by an entire empire, sitting alone at the very bottom of the abyss. She admitted bitterly that her existence had become nothing more than chaos without end or hope. Staring at the lifeless body of the bird, she deeply regretted ever allowing herself to be dragged into this cruel farce. The woman in the imperial red robe spoke to Thalia again, assigning her a role and turning her into nothing more than a puppet in the struggle for the throne. Thalia turned sharply, her blue eyes filled with the sadness of a child rejected by the whole world. She stood motionless in the pouring rain, staring at the small, still creature on the ground like a dark omen foretelling her own life. She wondered if life had truly and completely left that little body. As heavy silence settled over her mind, she reached out with her small hand toward the remains. She wanted to touch death itself, to understand and measure just how cruel and harsh this world really was. Her face held a gravity far beyond her years. In that broken bird, she recognized her own absolute loneliness. But then, a small miracle happened. The bird twitched faintly. Thalia realized with shock and disbelief that the little life still remained. She whispered softly, unable to believe it, feeling an unusual warmth radiating from her own palms. She cradled the tiny bird gently as if it were a priceless treasure. She swore to protect this fragile life against all harm and danger. The creature nestled deep within her palm, sealing a sacred bond between two lonely, abandoned souls. She looked at the lost bird and saw herself, a creature without a home, abandoned even by her own mother. She breathed softly to warm her cold hands, asking gently if the small being felt cold in such a harsh, unforgiving world. Standing silently in her fine but unsuitable gown, the princess's fragile figure almost vanished into the dark, gloomy atmosphere as she stared at the soaked ground beneath her. She wondered anxiously what she should do now, when every shred of hope seemed shattered beyond repair. A dark thought crossed her mind. Perhaps everything would be better, or at least simpler, if she destroyed this reality herself. Her blue eyes clouded with tears. She prayed with all her heart for a miracle to save her broken soul. Amidst the heavy rain, that small figure looked so alone, as if about to be swallowed whole by the palace's cold indifference. Suddenly, a voice rang out from above, asking sharply what she was doing in such a dirty, dark, and miserable place. She held back her sobs, yet bitter tears continued to stream down her stained face. She lifted her head, her deep blue gaze filled with infinite sorrow yet also unyielding determination. Beneath the old tree, in the middle of the torrential rain, stood a stranger wrapped in a dark cloak, still and silent as an ancient statue, observing everything around him. From beneath his hood, eyes of electric blue shone with a strange light. holding centuries of melancholy and terrifying gravity. Young Thalia looked up at him with bright, innocent eyes, a gaze full of desperate hope amidst her cruel abandonment. That fateful meeting under the pouring rain marked the starting point of a chain of tragedies that would eventually change the destiny of the entire empire. She pressed her small hands together in a humble prayer, a gesture full of fervor and despair from a soul searching for salvation. She studied the stranger in confusion and wonder, questioning the true identity of this man who possessed divine charisma yet remained a complete mystery. With sudden boldness, she asked if he could not see she was trapped at the bottom of an abyss, unable to climb out or survive on her own. The young man's gaze wavered, touched by a strange empathy as he read the pain consuming the child's soul. He looked down bitterly, reproaching himself for ever setting foot in this place full of resentment, hatred, and pain. The heavy sound of boots stepping through mud signaled the end of that chance meeting and the beginning of a bloody game of chess for ultimate power. Varkas walked silently toward Thalia, his black cloak billowing in the darkest weather like a mysterious intervention sent by fate. She stepped back in alarm as his muddy boots came to a halt directly before her, casting an immense invisible pressure upon her. Varkas extended his slender hand and ordered the girl to give him whatever she was holding, so that he might take care of it for her. His sharp blue eyes remained as hard and unyielding as marble, revealing a ruthless coldness toward all living things, especially the most fragile and helpless among them. Thalia lifted her gaze to meet his. Within her pupils shone a brilliance vast and deep as an entire galaxy. Between these two souls, the loneliest beings in the whole empire, a silent duel began, a clash of wills that needed no words. She pressed her small, dirt-streaked hands tightly against her chest, guarding what she held with all her strength. She fought desperately to shield the fragile, dying creature within her palms, while the young man stared intently, unwavering, at her hands. In a voice cold as ice, he spoke directly of the very thing she clutched so fiercely against her heart, a truth that stunned her completely. He asked if such a small life truly mattered so much to her, yet Thalia offered no clear answer, only a slight, contradictory shake of her head that betrayed her true feelings. Then came a cruel shift in his manner, as he ordered her to get rid of the bird entirely. It laid bare the terrifying coldness hidden beneath his noble, composed appearance. Varkas Raidgosiarkan stood like a wall of silence in the face of the child's stubborn resistance. Yet his gaze betrayed complex thoughts, turning over and over in his mind as he looked at the girl who dared to stand firm against his own cruelty. Thalia remained frozen in place, her deep blue eyes wide with shock as she felt the brutal turning of her fate. Without warning, and much to her utter surprise, the young man lifted her up into his arms. At that very moment, the loud cawing of crows echoed through the air, an omen announcing the beginning of a storm, both in the sky and in their lives. The little girl let out a small cry of surprise, her cheeks flushed red with a mix of shame and fear at the decisive action taken by the stranger in the dark cloak. He commanded her coldly not to move, and the sheer weight of his gaze silenced her instantly, leaving her in profound amazement. Though she offered weak, futile resistance, he kept her small form firmly held within his iron grasp. She held her breath, caught in a state of panic, yet amidst the freezing rain that poured endlessly down, she felt an unusual warmth spreading through her where he held her. Thalia looked at him, confused and wondering why a stranger would ever reach out to save a soul abandoned and cast aside by the entire world. Her small, soiled hands pressed tightly together, as if trying to hold fast to this fragile glimmer of hope that had only just been born. The heavy sound of footsteps sinking into the mud marked the end of her long days of solitude and humiliation. The young man carried her silently away from beneath the old tree, leading her away forever from this place of resentment and pain, to begin a new and unknown journey. He glanced down at his boots, thick with mud, and sighed, thinking that the current situation was truly the worst possible one. His electric blue eyes burned with clear disdain. To him, the little princess's presence seemed nothing more than a tiresome, heavy burden. Thalia, her face flushing with innocent pride, suggested she could reward her savior with treasures far more luxurious than his worn garments. She declared proudly that she was the daughter of an immensely powerful figure, promising generous compensation and great riches to her benefactor. But the young man only laughed coldly and mockingly, remarkable pride indeed for such a small, insignificant creature. His icy words struck Thalia hard, wounding her pride deeply in the face of such utter indifference. She stammered, trying desperately to use her imperial rank to intimidate him, yet he continued carrying her without the slightest pause, walking steadily through the pouring rain. Her cheeks burned bright with shame as she realized her total helplessness against this stranger's immense strength and mysterious charisma. Two figures, one tall and imposing, the other small and delicate, moved silently away through the ancient garden, leaving behind them the palace of endless intrigue. The sound of their footsteps squelching in the mud marked the beginning of a unique bond, one that would eventually shake and overturn the entire empire. Under the torrential downpour, the mysterious young man unknowingly sheltered Thalia, this lost creature rejected even by her own mother. Seeing the child's pale, shivering face, he asked her softly if she felt the biting cold of this cruel, ungrateful world. Thalia did not answer. She simply huddled closer, still cradling the dying bird deep within her dirt-streaked hands. His gaze, half hidden under the hood of his cloak, wavered slightly, revealing a mysterious power as he observed the princess's fragile state. Suddenly he spoke with bitter words regarding the poor bird trapped in the mud, saying it should have been destined for a far more glorious fate than this. Gently he wrapped his hands around Thalia's smaller ones, striving to transfer some warmth to this soul that despair had turned cold and numb. Thalia nestled closer into his hold. For the very first time, amidst the storms of power and danger surrounding her, she had found something solid and steady to lean upon. Her expression was one of pure astonishment. She simply could not believe that a complete stranger could care for her this much. He spoke with a note of distress, realizing her fingers had already turned cold as stone, and he had not noticed until now. Standing motionless beneath the ancient tree, he asked her in a grave voice just how long the second princess had stood there alone, waiting in the rain. Little Thalia lifted her head, eyes wide with shock, as the young man addressed her directly in the middle of that storm. He fixed her with a gaze shining with a strange light, and criticized her coldly for her disheveled appearance, hardly fitting for a royal princess. His lips barely moved, as if whispering a curse or a dark prophecy. Before falling back into a mysterious silence, he lowered his head deep in thought, carrying within himself an ancient sorrow as he looked down at the child shivering from the cold. The heavy drumming of rain upon the old branches seemed to foretell a future filled with bloody upheaval and change. Their blue eyes met and lit up in recognition, the fateful encounter between the ruler and the outcast. Alone in the vast garden, they formed a dark living painting, the union of two lost souls wandering in the dark. Thalia studied him in confusion, wondering why he looked at her with such intensity and gravity. Their reflections seemed to merge in each other's eyes, as if all the terrible secrets of the empire were revealing themselves at that precise moment. He lifted her up higher in his arms, asking himself whether, in his reflection, she finally saw the truth, or merely a beautiful illusion. A brilliant flash of lightning suddenly illuminated the space around them, while a distant voice called out for the young lady, warning of approaching dramatic events. Varkas carried Thalia silently through the storm, his calm, serene demeanor contrasting strangely against the chaos raging all around. In the distance, her governess ran frantically, searching everywhere, her hoarse voice almost swallowed up and silenced by the roar of the downpour. Thalia stared out into empty space in silence, Her bright eyes now held a mysterious galaxy within them, hiding away her enduring pain and sorrow. Varkas spoke sharp, immediate words of farewell, cutting short the bond that had barely begun to form. His sharp blue eyes pierced through the rain, projecting an invisible pressure and an authority that commanded respect from everything around him. He silently gathered the edge of the young lady's cloak around her, the atmosphere growing heavy and suffocating. Every movement betrayed a hidden purpose. Raindrops slid from the wet leaves, cold to the touch, like secret tears shed for a tragic destiny. The storm soaked her shoulders, blurring her delicate features while revealing the deep melancholy that enveloped her whole being. Varkas stood firm upon the sodden ground, his cold gaze passing judgment upon an empire built entirely on conspiracy and lies. Thalia's eyes remained fixed upon the small dying bird resting in her palms. She could feel that fragile spark of life slowly fading away under the freezing rain. The young man's blue eyes flashed with a strange light, a dark look that seemed to weigh and measure the very existence of this poor little creature. Their fingers brushed softly against each other, a brief moment of silent communion between two souls both desperate to be understood. The sound of footsteps squelching in the mud grew louder, and the young man knelt firmly down to face the second princess in her distress. Suddenly he lifted Thalia up again, his tall frame wrapping around her like a providential savior amidst the ruins of her broken trust. He moved away with steady, determined steps, leaving the palace and its intrigues far behind, tearing her away from the dark, endless rain. One small hand reached desperately out into the void, as if Thalia were suspended between life and death itself. She begged him to stop. Her tear-filled eyes reflected her shock at the stranger's irrevocable decision. She offered him the most precious thing she possessed in the whole world, hoping the man in the dark cloak would finally understand her distress and pain. She pleaded earnestly, asking if he would agree to take the bird with him, entrusting her very last hope to the one who now held her destiny in his hands. Thalia lowered her head to hide her turmoil, and began to speak of the loneliness she had endured for so long. She confessed that her hands were far too small and weak, whereas he brought a warmth she had never known or imagined possible. A subtle touch bridged the distance between the disgraced princess and the mysterious young man. He protected her amidst the surrounding darkness. It was the beginning of a fateful alliance that would one day change the entire history of Rowan. The life of that tiny bird rested between their hands, just as fragile and precarious as Thalia's own status at that moment. Her eyes shone with newfound determination, as if she had finally found her single true ray of hope. The stranger watched her in silence. Behind his dark gaze lay plans and schemes capable of plunging the entire imperial family into bloodshed. She looked back at him with immense distress, a cry for help powerful enough to soften even the most ruthless heart. He turned his face slightly away, troubled and moved by the young princess's touching innocence. In a grave voice she asked if he truly believed the bird would survive, testing the faith that had only just begun to grow within her. Thalia stood frozen, her face stained and tear-streaked, having just lived through a moment cruel enough to break her spirit. Yet despite her despair, Varkas gave a slight nod of his head, assuring her that this small life would indeed be spared. Immediately, Thalia rushed wildly out into the pouring rain, her small feet splashing through the mud, defying fate itself. The scenery blurred as she ran. Her frantic race became a desperate duel against death. Her cheeks flushed bright red from the effort. She ran breathless and agitated, determined to grasp this fragile hope, pushing her way through the thorny bushes of the garden. Her determined action revealed remarkable inner courage. Her blue pupils burned bright, reflecting the stormy sky and marking the full awakening of the hidden strength within her. She turned back abruptly, hesitating, scarcely daring to believe in the miracle Varkas had just granted her. Behind her, the silver cross upon Varkas's cloak shone brilliantly, radiating an aura of mysterious power. Varkas remained motionless beneath the old tree, watching Thalia's small figure fade into the distance, the prelude to a decisive game yet to be played. She turned back once more, still uncertain. Her blue eyes betrayed her confusion and unease regarding the young man's enigmatic presence. He watched her with a face both fine and cold. His gaze felt heavy, as if weighing the tragic destiny of the young princess. Standing still in that dark garden, Thalia could not suppress her curiosity, wondering why he remained there like a silent phantom, refusing to leave. She moved away with deep anxiety, tormented by the thought that he might still be watching her lonely figure from the shadows. Sadness marked her young features as she began to truly feel the crushing weight of being abandoned by her own people and family. Her small footsteps eventually halted on the path. Hesitation and anxiety overwhelmed her as she faced the necessity of returning to that palace of endless intrigue. The heavy sound of boots stepping through the mud signaled imminent danger, shattering all the illusions of the imperial court. A rough hand seized Thalia's arm suddenly. An angry voice demanded to know where she had been hiding during the grand celebration. The servant dragged her roughly away, scolding her sharply for the great worry she had caused Empress Cenevia. She examined Thalia's mud-covered clothes with horror and demanded an explanation, but the child merely lowered her eyes and lied that she had simply slipped and fallen. Dragged back through the freezing rain, the young girl endured every reproach from her governess for having wandered recklessly out in such weather. Yet all scolding and reprimands ceased instantly when the young lady stopped dead in her tracks. Her face froze in utter astonishment at a miracle unfolding in the darkness. Her bright pupils no longer reflected only the cold and gloom, but rather a sky of stars with extraordinary splendor, shimmering with magical colors. This secret light emanated from the ancient tree, spreading a mystical glow that sealed the child's destiny forevermore.